Oh, 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 oh. Yeah, okay, you get the point. Let's just talk about it. Wizard of Legend 2. Wizard of Legend 2. Wizard of Legend 2. I'm sorry, it's still not comprehended in my temporal. It's still developing at the moment. I would never in a million years legitimately have ever thought that this would happen. Heck, I was at best hoping for a mobile port of Wizard of Legend 1, and, well, we know how that's going. And yet, here we are, at the precipice of a new sequel to one of mine and many others' most beloved roguelikes. And if you're like me, after watching the trailer that released a couple days ago, there is a lot going through your head, so let's just break this down. Okay, so Wizard of Legend 2. Yes, this is a real thing that really was announced to be released on Steam several days ago. Now, just announced is a key word here, because this was a kind of bare trailer. We got a 45-second video with like 30 seconds of gameplay and no release date. Still, we did get confirmation that this will be releasing on Steam, and that it is, from the looks of it, decently well into production. But this does look to me to be a pretty early announcement based on the gameplay we got. I can't be totally sure because of the lack of a release date, and I'll get into this in a second, but it looks to me like the base and concept are pretty solidly done, but other areas are definitely still being developed. I expect this is going to be a not ready for a while kind of thing, and we are going to see some substantial changes happening in the future. Again, I'm going to touch on my thoughts on that and the potential danger I'm spotting later, but as of now, I'm going to look into what we know for sure about the game right now. The biggest and most obvious change is a 2D to 3D shift from the original. This is obviously a pretty big deal. I mean, that is quite a heck of a change to make. As for first impressions from me, I say yes, yes, and yes. Ironically, my last video on the channel was about this exact subject, and I am super stoked that Wizard of Legend is making a jump into 3D. I do go into more detail on my thoughts on 3D and roguelikes in that video, so check it out if you want to hear more on my thoughts on that, but for short, I am in full support of 3D roguelikes due to just how much you can do with them. More content to randomize, more utilities to give to players, more room for creative expression and gameplay mechanics, graphics, and stylistic choices. There's a lot going for 3D, and I'm all for it. I will admit, however, that a part of me is sad to see the absence of the incredible pixel graphics the game had before, but at the same time, I am optimistic about what potential the game has with 3D. Now, I mentioned that danger sense I had going off a little bit ago, and it is about this particular subject. I am definitely excited for the shift to 3D, don't get me wrong, but I can't help but notice the graphics compared to the original were a little eh. It's not really fair to compare the graphics of the original and this one to each other, I know, but at the same time I couldn't help but miss the incredible style and detail present in the first game while watching the trailer, especially because of how much I enjoyed that aspect of the original game. I know 3D graphics won't ever really be in the same world as pixel graphics, but even comparing this game to other 3D roguelikes like Risk of Rain 2 and BPM, the graphics definitely feel lackluster, while in contrast, comparing the original Wizard of Legend to other pixel graphic games, I feel like it stood out. From what I saw in the trailer, the detail was minimal, the design's kinda bland, and I'm really just missing that unique style I've come to love from Wizard of Legend. However, this ties back into my hypothesis that this game is still very much in development. Contingent 99, the developer for the original Wizard of Legend, even stated this themselves in their Discord, quote, "Wizard of Legend is still very much in the development process." The announcement trailer really looks like it's showing off a well-made prototype of the final product, one that is well into being made, but nowhere close to getting finished. It's still in need of that polish that often arrives near the end of a game's development. So, compared to my hype for just the concept of Wizard of Legend in 3D, I'm really not too worried about the graphics and assume the game can only go up from here. And this sentiment spreads throughout my other opinions from the trailer. Speaking of those, let's move on from the graphics and into the gameplay. From the trailer, it looks like we are getting the same action-packed arcana-casting roguelike as we did in the original game. You still progress through a series of dungeons and defeat enemies in them, collecting items as you go and progressing further and further through dungeons and the occasional council boss until you reach, well, I assume the equivalent of Master Sura. Of course, there could definitely be some differences we haven't seen yet, but from what I saw, we are getting the tried and true Wizard of Legend formula, which is a-okay with me. The Arcana elements all seem to be carried right over and accounted for from the first game, and while there is an absence of Chaos Arcana, the little dark gate things blocking the separate dungeon rooms look pretty chaosy to me, hinting at that Arcana being a thing in the game that they just didn't show off yet or haven't fully developed. Honestly, I was kinda hoping to see some new Arcana elements, but that could very possibly be a thing we see down the road, or it wasn't shown in the trailer. I did, however, see some hintings of physical attacks, mostly from enemies but still there, and maybe that means there will be a physical Arcana option, but I'm not totally sure and I'm not banking on it since there wasn't much emphasis on it, but it would still be cool. However, I did at least notice what seemed to be some new Arcana moves, especially the bow thing going on towards the end. Slight aside, but I assume that was an Arcana move. However, if that was a weapon, and we get to use like different weapons infused with Arcana, each with their own moveset separate from each other, 100 points to Wizard of Legend 2 right there. Please let it be so. One of the larger gripes I've seen people express with the original game was its content size being on the smaller size, and that would be such an awesome way to expand the gameplay. I don't know though, that's kinda just a theory that popped into my head with pretty much zero evidence. I'm not banking on that or anything, and I wouldn't be too upset if it wasn't a thing. But still, I really hope it is. That would be amazing. Anyway, beyond Arcana, the enemies were another point of interest. I did notice a lot of new enemies and what I assumed to be a new boss, which was awesome to see. And if the cover art for the game is anything to go off of, I assume we are getting an entire new council, which is a big yes from me. I don't know how many council puns I could withstand before breaking my controller, so please bring in some new people. And also, you know, for gameplay variants and brand new created bosses, I guess, whatever. Just, please make the puns go away. On the more pessimistic side, some of the enemy designs, looking at you skeletons, were a little generic, but I'm still happy they added as many new enemies as they did, and again, there's more time for polish. And there's probably going to be more enemies added later on, or there are existing enemies that they didn't show. Most likely both of those things, to be honest. Moving on, as for combat, it seemed pretty good and pretty reminiscent of the OG Wizard of Legend, which again, I'm not opposed to. Don't fix what isn't broken. As I said earlier, the combat still revolves around casting Arcana, which I presume have timers on them that limit your casting, as is the case in the OG game. We didn't actually see that part in the trailer, however, so it's totally possible that they might replace that with a mana system or something else entirely, which would be a cool breath of fresh air for the combat, so long as it's implemented well. I honestly would be fine with the same tried and true timer system, but I'm not opposed to some changes to spice up combat, so long as the gameplay doesn't sacrifice for it. As for the actual Arcana moves themselves, I recognized some of the moves from the first game, and it was fun to see how they were reimagined in a 3D space. Also, there were some apparent new ones too, so that was awesome as well. They look good and well enough varied. And speaking of variants, I do hope the large Arcana arsenal present in the first game is present in the second. That was a huge upside to the game to me, and something that made the game much more replayable. As for the combat overall, I will say it looked a little slow compared to the original game, but not like snail slow. And it's 3D, so that could just be a perception thing. There is also time to speed up the gameplay a bit. I loved Wizard of Legend's fast gameplay style, and I think that was a large part of the appeal of the game for others as well. So I assume they'll probably be working on that in the future, or at least I hope so. But, to be fair, some people did complain about how fast the speed of the combat was, so maybe this is the fixed speed. Personally, I hope it's not, and they speed things up, but for now, we'll just have to see. Moving on to the environments, man, it was cool to see this game in a 3D space. The maps themselves were large and open, and the rooms spacious, and while the map was sectioned into pieces, it seemed like there was a good sense of connection between the individual rooms, with each one being pretty sizable and unique, including what looked like traps and hazards and all that. I was kinda disappointed to see that there might not be Arcana-themed dungeons anymore, unless they just didn't show wind and lightning in the trailer and that desert-looking place was the fire element. I loved the original design of facing one element type per dungeon with similar elementally themed enemies in them, especially taking into account the weaknesses and strengths of each Arcana against each other. Also, I think some more personality could be added to the maps as well. They were a little bit generic, especially compared to the vibrant thematic dungeons in the first game. Still, this is definitely not the end result, as I assume more stuff will probably be added and touched up on later on, and it was refreshing to see the world reinvented in a 3D space. Definitely something I'm looking forward to. Now, this next topic I want to go through actually doesn't have much to do with the game itself. Rather, it's a pretty big development with, well, the developers. Contingent 99, the sole developer of the original Wizard of Legend, is not the spearhead behind Wizard of Legend 2. It is now being developed by Dead Mage, another small indie gaming studio. For some reference as to who the heck they are, they were the ones behind Children of Morta, which is a game I assume several of you will recognize. I never actually played Children of Morta myself, but I've heard a lot of good things about it, and watching the trailer, it seemed pretty promising. While I'm sad to see Contingent 99 go, I'm excited that at least the studio handling Wizard of Legend 2 has some good experience with roguelikes. I also understand why Contingent 99 made this move. Primarily, they are hard at work on another project that we don't quite know about yet, and I assume they want to dedicate their time there. Which is totally awesome. I'd love to see what other wonders they can make, and I'm excited to see what they develop. Additionally, the Dead Mage studio has a decently larger team size than Contingent 99, 30 people versus 2. So it makes sense to hand out the torch to another studio and stay in an advisory role if Contingent 99 wanted to take the game to 3D, as that is a monumental task to take with just 2 people. As it stands, by passing over development, they still get to have some say in developments along with the sheer manpower of a larger team. Finally, Contingent 99 has been on Wizard of Legend for 7 years, so I assume they're just ready to move on, which is valid. Being passionate about your game is critical to success, but at a certain point, I understand that people just want to move on to other things, express their creativity, just do game dev stuff. So, best of luck to Contingent 99, I can't wait to see what they have in store, and I hope they get a good say in Wizard of Legend 2's development. I really don't have too much other than that to go over. The trailer was pretty short, and I don't want to jump to too many conclusions. But man, if anything, am I just excited for this thing. Like, just, wow. Wizard of Legend 2. It's still not quite comprehended yet. It just seemed like the community and game dev was small enough that a second game was an entire improbability. And yet, here we are. I loved Wizard of Legend to pieces, and despite my potential troubles with the second game, just knowing that we are getting that Wizard of Legend experience all over again fresh and anew is more than enough dopamine to offset my grimaces. But of course, I must ask you, dear viewers, what do you think of Wizard of Legend 2? Are you excited, fearful, somewhere in between? Let me know in the comments, and if you'll excuse me, I'm just gonna go back to check on this real quick. Alright, looks like it's developed. Let's see here. Oh ho ho. Oh ho ho ho. Oh ho boy.